Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content for eScribe Meetings. We're very happy to have you here with us today. Talking today about the state of the clerk's office and our survey that we've recently published as of this morning. So if you're here for the clerk survey results, you're in the right spot. We'll give folks a few minutes to filter in here until we get to a bit of a quorum, as I'm sure most people are familiar with. But we won't wait too long on ceremony, but we'll get started here in just a minute or so. Great. Let's go ahead and get started. A quick couple of notes. Again, my name is Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content for eScribe Meetings. I'm really happy you're here. Just a few normal webinar housekeeping items. A, thank you for joining us. We're very pleased to have you with us. B, all audience members on the Zoom webinar are mute by default. However, we do really encourage public commentary, public comments, chats. If you have Q&A or questions that you'd like answered from our guests today or about the data in the survey that we're going to present here shortly, please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature. We have people monitoring both, so we'll answer those questions quickly if we can. The Q&A session is the last 10-15 minutes of the session. So we'll collect those questions throughout the presentation and then answer them with our panelists at the back of the presentation. Excuse me. If you're curious, if you have access to an on-demand recording of the session, you will. We'll send both an on-demand recording and the slide deck in a follow-up email, usually within 24 hours is when we turn that around. We do have one small ask as you're joining us today. We ask that you help us out, give us a quality score. Right before the Q&A, we'll run a short poll. How did we do? What did you like? Didn't you not like? Those types of things, just to help us do better for the next time. And hopefully we see you again soon. We're planning a series of these thought leadership webinars under the Atlas Leadership Series banner for clerks, municipal clerks, city administrators, just with really interesting topics about the everyday kind of work and workplace strategies that you all employ. A little bit about eScribe before we get started with the presentation. We're proud to be founded in Markham, Ontario in 2007. Since then, we've been the dedicated solution provider of public meeting management software, specifically focused on public meetings only. We don't do the whole suite of services. We just focus solely on public meetings. It's a purpose-built platform for clerks, city administrators, and city and town managers across North America. And our goals are really to help you streamline your meeting preparation, have better run municipal and public meetings, and improve accessibility and engagement for your communities and stakeholders. This is a little chestnut from our co-founder, Parun Chadha. I use it to start because it's kind of our mantra and our vision for the organization as a whole. There's three types of meetings. There's the meeting you prepared for, there's the meeting you had, and then there's the meeting you wished you had. And it's certainly our endeavor and our goal to always help you have that meeting you wish you had. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce today's guests. We have Michelle Smybert of Clerks on Call, and as well as Michelle Casavecchia Summers of Clerks on Call. So we colloquially call them the two Michelles. So thank you, Michelles, for joining us. I'm having trouble accessing my notes. You give me 1 second. I can tell you a little bit about Michelle and Michelle. So Michelle Smybert, she's a master's in public administration, a certified municipal officer, an AMCTO instructor. This is a long list, so buckle in. She's got decades of experience, like many of you do. She started as the manager of licensing and elections at the City of London. She moved to a deputy city clerk position at Stratford. She served as CAO at Middlesex Center. She was a town clerk at the town of Tillsonburg, and she's currently the deputy mayor of Thames Center. So Michelle, welcome to the show, the presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, and then Michelle Casavecchia Summers, obviously a diploma in public administration, certified municipal officer, accredited Ontario municipal clerk, AMCTO instructor. She's clerked at Thames Center, has been a CAO/clerk at Perth South and a CEO/clerk at the town of Malahide, now retired. But together they make up the principles of Clerks on Call. And if you're interested in getting some consulting services for your municipality or your clerk role, they're available here. This information will also be sent out in the follow-up email that we'll send in 24 hours. Without further ado, Michelle, thank you for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
It's our pleasure to be here. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah,
Great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So I'll jump right in. So part of my job and our goal at eScribe was to get a better snapshot of the current kind of workplace conditions for clerks. So at the beginning of 2024, we partnered with the research committee of the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, IIMC, and we designed a survey and we sent that out and we got more than 500 responses, which was mind-blowing to us. So this is actually a display of all the responses that we got from across North America. So there's some really great representation, both Canada and the United States. 40 out of 50 states in the United States had clerks representing in the survey, and then 6 of 10 Canadian provinces, easy for me to say. um, like we see in your census information, whether you're in the US or Canada, the majority of people live in small towns. And so that was represented here. I'm from Indiana. I'm coming to you live from Indianapolis, Indiana. I live literally 50 minutes away from John Cougar Mellencamp's hometown of Bloomington. So I had to put the reference in here. But just the idea that, you know, most clerks are clerking in smaller communities is it's kind of one of the interesting demographic bits. And the next really interesting thing, the dynamic that I thought was interesting, especially somebody who's not as familiar with municipal communities and clerkship, is that the vast majority of clerks had served in their roles for more than 10 years. Obviously, you see 243 out of the 500 or so respondents. But then that next largest cohort is this 1 to 5 year mark of service. And Michelle, I didn't know if you had any thoughts there about your experiences with that kind of both the long timers, we'll call them, and the newcomers as well.
Yeah, so we're seeing a couple of really interesting trends there. I think it's that generation difference or boom in terms of the generation that has been in the clerk industry for quite some time. They're now looking at retiring or have retired. And I think that COVID's kind of helped them push through that retirement as well, unfortunately. And so what that does is it actually kind of catapults then new people into those clerk positions rather than that gradual transition. I think Michelle and I, we both had that gradual transition into those clerk roles. It gives you that opportunity to learn, gather that experience before being pushed into that role. So it certainly can be a challenge for the new clerks. And also the interesting thing is, as the seasoned clerks are now retiring, that pool of the knowledge and that mentorship is now decreasing. So now there may not be as many people that the newer clerks can lean on. So that's why we think, you know, if you've got association meetings, whether it's a local level, state level, or even larger, really try to build your networks, because we think that's going to be the success, especially for those newer clerks coming into the industry.
And Michelle, you actually fit this bill a little bit yourself, being a now retired clerk. And obviously, there's other services, so you state associations, local associations, but also expertise in the form of consultants like yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that, not just because it helps our business, but because we do believe that continuing education and getting as much training, as much educational opportunities, as well as those networking and mentoring opportunities is key to the success for some of the newer clerks. It is a very specialized field, as we all know, and there isn't often a lot of specific training that is going to really assist. And as Michelle mentioned, we're very fortunate that we were able to kind of learn as we developed into the clerks department. We had a lengthier period of time to be able to gain some of these skills and that knowledge. And it is becoming more challenging for newer clerks. So definitely encourage anyone to continue to seek out those opportunities to enhance their skill set and their training and the knowledge level as they move forward.
Yeah. And one of the other notes we talked about in the pre-call was a little bit about that, you know, with this shift in the demographic of clerks and their experience, these newer clerks may be coming in and have a little bit more familiarity with digital collaboration solutions, with digital workflows versus, you know, old school processes, which may be pen and paper and, you know, actually putting files in a file cabinet. Do you find that the newer clerks have more experience in kind of digital collaboration for public meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key to success. The small wrinkle is, though, Sometimes your councils or other staff may not be used to those processes, especially if you've had a seasoned clerk who's been there, forever and now is retired. You might not have the buy-in, so you might have to work a little bit harder on that to make sure that the entire team, council, and your support team understand that technology is a good thing moving forward.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about how change management is such an important component, especially if you're assuming the mantle of a clerk for the first time and introducing some new things. Just a few more demographic things. We'll go through these relatively quickly, but the majority of clerks said that they were in this 20 to 50 meetings per year that they're having to prepare or administer. And then they're spending about 5 to 10 hours a week. We'll get back into this when we have a section on time management. But this is one of the biggest light bulb moments for me, or an aha moment for me, was that the majority of people feel like the public is not well engaged with their local government. Is that a trend you're seeing? Because I've heard counter arguments to that people are more engaged. They might be louder or more contentious, but more people are engaged. And I'm curious, what just your thoughts on that in terms of engagement with the public.
Yeah, you touched on that a little bit, Josh. I think sometimes we're hearing from the loud minority, and that is certainly a part of that public engagement process. But I think too, so you're asking clerks if we feel that the public is engaged, and I think sometimes we're a little bit tough on ourselves, because I think as clerks we do a very good job of what we can to try to engage the public. The reality is though is that we don't control other people's behaviors, right? So we can do as much work as we can. People will only engage when they feel it's important or if it means something to them. So what we're finding, or what I find on the elected official side, is I can do everything I can to try to advise of meetings that are coming up, trying to get people to participate. But 9 times out of 10, people are coming to meetings when they're in opposition to something, when it directly affects them, right? So I think that's always been the case. I think that always will be the case. So I don't want clerks to be too hard on themselves. I'm sure you're doing an awesome job. And I think what's evolving though is the different channels and media sources that we can try to engage the public, right? So whether it's social media or live streaming of council meetings, that sort of thing, just keep on doing that good work, and we'll get some progress, like little bits at a time. And I think you should be celebrating those small achievements.
Absolutely. And Michelle, by virtue of me researching your bio, I did find your last council meeting online on YouTube. So I think that's another great thing, is that kind of we talk about this, meeting the public where they are. And you said, multiple channels, but somebody may want to binge the city council meeting like a Netflix series, and they can get just as good information. They might not be able to participate, but they can certainly get the information that the public meeting provided. This is one small wrinkle, and Michelle Casavecchia Summers, I'm curious if you feel like this is, you have kind of a long run through a number of different municipalities. It really seems like the public engagement is overrepresented on the larger communities, those 50,000, 100,000. They feel like the public is well engaged, maybe just by virtue of having a larger community that they're filling their council chambers at every meeting. But really, the smaller communities don't feel that engagement as much. They see, more than 60% said they don't feel well engaged in their community. Is that something you've noticed in your clerkship?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Josh. And I think that a couple of factors, I think, in terms of the larger municipalities particularly, is in most instances, the larger municipalities have dedicated communications and outreach staff, as well as larger budgets in order to be able to actually undertake some additional types of advertising, engage in some different types of mediums for getting information out to the public. Certainly, having been a clerk in a small municipality as well as in a larger one, there are definite budget constraints and time constraints in some of the smaller communities. And so whether that's a direct result of public engagement or whether that's just the perception, but there's no question it is difficult in when you have less resources to be able to get the word out to the public and feel more confident that the word is being delivered to a wider range of individuals.
Yeah, that's a great note, Michelle. One thing that we didn't put in the slide, but it's in the full report, and we'll link to the PDF for the audience members so they can read the full report, is that The clerk's office doesn't grow in terms of headcount until you reach about that 100,000 mark. Most clerk's offices were 1 to 5 people, so that's a lot of work for just, you know, even a single person. For even up to that 50,000 mark, that 100,000 mark community, the headcount doesn't typically grow in terms of their clerk staff until you get to that 100,000 mark. So I thought that was interesting that there's a lot of just expectations and a lot of work, a lot of project management on a clerk's shoulders. I've heard the anecdote colloquially, if you don't know where to put it in the clerk's office. So
I think in
great.
some cases, that's exactly the case.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the next thing that I thought was really interesting in this presentation, and this was, I've read the headlines, but it was interesting to see this like firsthand from Clerks. We said, what trends are you noticing in public meetings? And number one, by and far, was hostility. Again, you see number two, less public participation, more public participation. I think that's just the large and the small communities competing against each other. But the number one trend from most clerks, they said hostility. And I just thought that was really unfortunate because we know that clerks are, you know, doing their duty in service of the communities. They're engaged in their public administration for a good reason. I'm just curious if you know, I have some hypotheses on why that may be, but obviously you have firsthand experience, especially as you mentioned, a more kind of polarized political climate, such as around COVID, such as some of the kind of I'll call them culture conflicts that we seem to have more frequently in media and those types of things. But I'll stop talking, and I don't know if you had some thoughts there.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think just building on a couple things we've already touched on, I think the fact that since COVID, more and more municipalities are live streaming their meetings, are allowing for virtual participation where that never was, or was certainly not very frequent prior to COVID. I think that's allowed individuals who may have been, I'm going to use the term disgruntled, may not have felt compelled to actually go out to their local council meeting in person. But if they can do it in a 5 or 10 minute window in the privacy of their own home, people are tending to feel more of that opportunity to get involved. And while, you know, at the heart of it, involvement and engagement is a good thing, if people are not being respectful or not showing proper decorum when they're making their concerns known, then that's an issue. And you know, the term here that was in the slide was hostility. And I recognize that. And certainly we've seen that to a large degree in the last number of years. But I think I want to kind of build on that last thing I just said in the sense of, while there is increased hostility, there's also definite increase in lack of respect for public authority, for public decision making in general. At least that's been our experience that we've been seeing. And I think you're right. I think certainly the polarized political climate definitely adds to that. As well, I think another factor is in many instances, because of social media, there's a lot of misinformation out there, or even disinformation, if you want to use those terms. And I think that has a big factor. There's a lot of misconceptions. People hear snippets of information at the coffee shop, or you know, read a little post, 2 or 3 lines on social media, and they think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. Well, that's just a snapshot and a very small piece of what the whole information or the whole discussion that council might, or whole policy issue that a council might be dealing with. And they tend to react a little bit more aggressively to some degree. And then also what we've also found is that, as Michelle had mentioned earlier about a squeaky wheel, and that in a lot of instances, people come across very strong and to some degree very hostile because they want to get their squeaky wheel greased. And they think that by, you know, bullying to some degree or being a little more aggressive will get them the result that they want in some of those instances. So no question about it, there's definitely an increase. And you know, like I said, I have my own ideas of what caused it, but I think that, you know, there are things that we can do as well to try to mitigate that. And I think that, you know, as clerks, how do we help to manage that increased hostility? And you had mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation about preparing for the meetings that happened and the ones we wish we would have had. So I think that building on that a little bit is when we are prepared, when we try to anticipate some of the issues or the concerns that the public may have going into a meeting, making sure that we communicate those to our council, to our chair, helps to keep them informed of what they might anticipate or expect if we know a particular person is particularly upset about something. And then I think the other part of that is, and I'm not going to take too much time on this, but I think this is important, is having good processes and procedures for your public meetings, and making sure you have your chair well educated to be able to be confident, to be able to come across and know exactly what the protocols, what the processes are, being able to communicate those at the beginning of the public session and say, this is how we're all going to deal with the situation. We understand you have concerns. We can empathize, we can understand your issues, but we also have to follow the decorum and be respectful when we present our various issues and concerns going forward. So, being able to identify those flashpoints early, making sure that we've got some talking points to help the chair and identify those particular persons that we know in advance might be causing some issues. I think that's going to go a long way to helping to reduce that hostility and de-escalate some controversial situations.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a hostile dog barking in the background. Michelle Speinberg, I'm curious, as somebody who's currently serving on council, how does that good due process, that procedural know-how, how does that apply when you do have a conflict in a public meeting?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important, as Michelle had mentioned, that everyone's prepped. Usually during our orientation when we first were elected, we've got education on the code of conduct and the procedural bylaw, so we know what to expect and what to do in those situations. And I think consistency is the key, right? So you can't treat one person a certain way and then deal with someone else differently. You really do need to be consistent. And I think sometimes what is frustrating to elected officials and also staff, quite frankly, is, while that other person on the other side of the horseshoe can be hostile, we need to be, respectful. We need to be professional, right? So that's hard to deal with sometimes, right? When someone can lash out at you, but we can't lash out at those other people.
Yeah, I'm thinking for that maybe it's a hostile audience member. They may come to that one meeting, but you have to come to every meeting as a counselor or a clerk. So consistency there. Yeah, we talked about training council members, focus on the quiet majority. I think that was another interesting thought that I can't recall who brought it up, but noting that loud but squeaky wheel is the loud minority, but that the clerk and the council are there to serve the community at large, and that the community at large may not be that contentious, hostile person. I think that was a really important point as well. Great. So this is just a breakdown of by community size, just to show that there was a uniform kind of response to this hostility question. And then we're getting into the next part of the presentation here, which is really the number one challenge that clerks face. We asked, and it was very apparent what the answer was time management. We saw that there was 5 to 10 hours a week for preparation for a public meeting, no matter what kind of public meeting that would be. I'm curious, just as consultants now and retired clerks, how do you approach or kind of teach the clerks under your wings how to better manage their time? What are some guiding principles there?
Well, I think, Josh, I would agree that about 25% of a clerk's week is probably spent preparing for public meetings, whether it be a council meeting, a committee meeting, those types of things. And I think that preparation is very important to make sure that, we have anticipated what any issues or concerns might be. But I think that as well, time management in terms of meetings, I think that having a solid procedure bylaw with documented processes again is going to be key. And one of the other things in terms of time management, or in terms of some of the concerns that have come up in some of the challenges, is people are looking to have fewer last minute changes as well. And I think that, again, the procedure bylaw and having a good process for your agenda preparation, for your meeting preparation is going to be the key to not having those last minute changes. But I think the other thing that as clerks, we all need to have that solid backing of the rest of the team. I know that we wear many different hats and we have a lot of roles and responsibilities, and we are probably one of the few municipal staff that actually touch every single department at some point or another, because our roles are so wide and so vast across the entire organization. And making sure that everyone is on the same page, that everyone understands what the processes are, what the time constraints and the deadlines might be, is going to go a long way. Definitely having the support of your other department heads and your CAO is going to make a big difference in terms of reducing those last minute issues and trying to scramble when things come up. But I think the other thing too is that we all know that regardless of how prepared we are, no matter how well we think we've got things organized, there's going to be things that come up and there's going to be things that happen. And so I think the other thing we need to recognize is that, we need to do what we can to try to be prepared, but also don't sweat it. You have to basically expect the unexpected moving forward, and regardless of how well defined a process we have in place. And I think a lot of that comes from learning pains and experience over time. Is you start to develop some additional techniques and skill set to be able to address things that crop up. I can remember when I first started as a municipal clerk, defined processes, got everything in place, and then something comes up that you didn't anticipate. It's like, oh, okay, now how do I deal with that? So we kind of circle back to the whole thing as clerks, is having that network, having a mentor, having somebody that can help us to be able to work through some of these issues and problems going forward, is going to also go a long way to be able to, assist that newer clerk that's just trying to get familiar with all of these things that can crop up. And there was a time period when I thought that I'd seen it all. And then ultimately a meeting or two meetings later, something would happen. It's like, whoa, that's new. Hadn't seen that. So regardless of whether you've spent 3 years or 30 years in the business, these are just the realities of our roles that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought it was most interesting. Obviously, I think we talked about this a little bit. We have some issues with our survey design. Marissa just pointed out the budget is on as a line item twice there, so apologies for that, Marissa. But time management, we didn't distinguish in the survey question or the survey design. Was that the clerks' time management or their stakeholder, their counterparts' time management? I mentioned that I'm kind of a frequent offender on abusing the service level agreements that I have with other counterparts in my organization. How do you coach those stakeholders, especially if they're kind of in that executive leadership position or a council position? How do you coach them to better adhere to those deadlines and those timetables that you need to be able to effectively prepare for the meeting?
Well, certainly, I think with the advent of electronic agenda management, for example, it actually helps to impose those hard deadlines, because without that, sometimes you can be a bit more flexible than maybe you should be in terms of those deadlines. And it's interesting because as a clerk, I understand the importance of adhering to those deadlines, no question about it. Now I'm on the elected official side, and it's like, can we not just kind of, get this on the agenda, because we don't want to wait for like a whole month? So I definitely can see the other side, but I think technology for sure. And also, again, reach out to your colleagues, your associations, to find those best practices that you can then apply to your municipality. And I also just wanted to point out another thing in terms of time management. When you have like a newer clerk coming in, you might not have that historical knowledge of how that was done before or what decisions had been made. So you might be spending a lot more time as well, searching through those documents and trying to find that. So again, if you've got a good, records retention system to find documents, then that's going to help you as well. So I say If you can, if you can afford it, embrace that technology. That technology will help you moving forward, but definitely don't be afraid to pick up a phone, send someone an email to get some help.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and this is just kind of another point to underscore that is that despite that time management is a difficult challenge for most clerks, and that learning experience may be, or that learning curve may be very steep, especially if you're a newer clerk. There's nobody saying, or the majority of people are saying, no, that time is well spent. We have to be prepared for that meeting. Obviously, that's probably a byproduct of that the meeting has to happen by law. And no matter what, the show must go on, so to speak. But I thought this was another interesting point was that, does that time spent preparing for the meeting make it difficult to manage your other duties and your other functions as a clerk? So I'm curious, is there a happy medium there? Is there a nice balance? How do you prioritize those different things? Obviously, the public meeting has to happen, but you have a lot of other duties and functions that you have to fill as well. Is it a question of delegation? Is it a question of better collaboration? What's been your experience, Michelle? Which one? Sorry.
Yeah, so yes, I can start. I think, to be honest, it's having a good team around you, whether it's other members, team members within the clerk's office or other team members within the organization. So having them understand, the deadlines, the challenges that you're going through, I think can make it easier on you. Certainly, I think that's why we love the role of the clerk. It's challenging, right? There's definitely a lot of work, a lot of balls that you're balancing out at one time, and I think that's why we're drawn to this work, because it's never dull, right? You never have the same day twice. So again, I think it's building that team within the office, building good relationships with members of council as well, and also establishing those networks. Again, if you've got a question, you know exactly who to call so that you can get that information back quickly.
And I think maybe just to add to what Michelle said, I think the other thing, and you hit on it, Josh, was where there's an opportunity to delegate, to be able to get some assistance from somebody else. Absolutely. In many instances, we talked about this in smaller municipalities, lots of times you don't have anybody else that you can actually delegate work to. But I think the other thing is having bona fide processes and actually protocols, policies on how you deal with things also are going to make that easier, not just for yourself in maintaining consistency, but also if there happens to be a change in staff, then that allows those individuals to hit the ground running a lot quicker and be able to provide you with that assistance as well.
One question I have here too, this is, I think, a stark contrast between clerks in Canada and clerks in the United States, is that in your names and your titles you have designations of certified municipal clerk or public administration official. It seems to be a much more I would say developed certification process in Canada. Do you have any experience with what are kind of some of the good certifications to get on the United States side of the border, where it's a little bit more, I don't want to say free for all, but it's certainly less developed as a profession with less certifications? I don't know if you have any recommendations there.
I don't personally, because I'm not really familiar with the certifications. I've attended some IIMC conventions and conferences. I do think that there was really a kind of a fulsome approach to the education sessions and the attendance at that. And I think so that's similar to what we see with like AMCTO, for example, in Ontario. So maybe it's there informally, but maybe not formally.
Great. And again, we talked about this. I think this slide might be a little bit out of order, but in terms of time management, the number one thing that most of our respondents, more than 400 out of the 507 that responded, said last minute changes were the biggest kind of time management deal breaker. And then document management and workflow. So I think technology difficulties, those things seem to be kind of coalescing around a theme here of, how do you make more time in your day? Certainly we offer a platform, not to pitch it too hard, but Jackie, I'll actually jump the gun a little bit on QA. Jackie asked, She says, are there any pointers to ease into being more electronic in meetings, creating meetings agendas, and in other areas of the office as well? Are there any kind of, beyond public meeting management software per se, are there other collaboration suites, other tools or platforms that you, Michelle, recommend to your clients?
Yeah, certainly, and Michelle hit on it earlier, record management software. So especially for the newer clerks, as she said, it's sometimes difficult to find that particular report, council minute, resolution, whichever. If there is an opportunity to be able to electronic document records management, that is going to be huge in terms of helping clerks. I can remember when I started my career, because that was a number of years ago, and we didn't have computerized record keeping. Everything was, it was actually we had a Rolodex, and when you needed to find something on animal control, you spun the Rolodex to the animal control and carried on. So I mean, there's so many new opportunities with technology, and there's so many great products and vendors out there. But I think record management is one that not only will assist the clerk, but can assist every single department in the organization, and then can free up time for the clerk. If somebody can go into an electronic portal, another direct department head or manager, and find that council resolution because it's there electronically, then they're not going to come knocking on the clerk's door saying, I need a copy of the minutes of the council meeting on such and such a date, or this resolution, because they can actually locate it themselves. So that too goes to the time management aspect. So there is definitely an investment up front in terms of not just dollars, but time to prepare the system, but huge paybacks at the end.
Yeah, Michelle, we talked about this a little bit in the pre-call, that's almost the expectation now. I literally paid a parking ticket online this morning. I can't imagine a world where I'd still have to walk into Municipal Hall and fork over cash or a check to the city to say, here's my parking citation. So I think it kind of is a little bit illustrative of that kind of societal change, that more people expect technology, and especially with things like deadlines. I imagine a world earlier where if you didn't have a project management system or a meeting management system, you'd have to send out reminders by yourself, like either through email or walking by the mayor's office. Hey, I need those documents. Now that can all be automated. Those workflows can be automated and save that time and that reminder process.
That's exactly.
Oh, sorry.
No, as I said, that's exactly the case, and the value of that is far beyond just simply having a streamlined process. Freeing up your time and the expectations is huge.
Yeah.
Yep. And if I just could, Josh, workflows, that's something that can free up some time as well with clerks. And again, like I call myself technology challenged, because usually there's inevitably I'm not comfortable with it most of the time. However, if I can use it, then I think anyone can. And this is why it's important to talk to other clerks, talk to other local governments out there, because it's ever evolving, ever changing. And so what's working for one local government could also work for you. So I think that's why it's important to kind of keep connected with those in your industry.
That's great. Yeah, and especially since we know that the majority of communities are 10,000 or fewer, that's a small clerk's office or just a single clerk, there's somebody out there that's probably doing a better, more efficient job than you. Michelle, I'm glad you brought this up. We talk about this a lot on the eScribe side and elsewhere. The whole process of change management when you do introduce a new system, and I'll stop sharing here. We can just kind of get right into the Q&A. When you do introduce a new system, especially if you're entering an administration that had maybe decades of collaboration together, that maybe the executive leadership has been there for 10, 15 years or more. There's a municipality next door to me that the same executive leader has been there for 20 years. And now the city administration is a little bit in disarray because they have a new executive leader who has a new process for doing things. But even at the clerk level of introducing a new workflow, introducing a new system, how do you manage that change management with those stakeholders in your organization?
Right. And that's a good point. And I think clerks need to be aware that you have to understand that this is a process. It's not the flip of the switch, right? So even though you're convinced that this change is going to make a world of difference, is going to make it easier for everyone, you have to have the buy-in, right, from everyone within the organization. So because you only have this one chance to do it right. So if you want to make a change, understand that it's actually a process, and there are different change management philosophies out there. You can even hire a consultant if you've got someone need to do that as well. But really invest some time in terms of what the plan's going to look like, how people are going to feel, what the outcomes will be, and make sure you've got some resources to help people through that change, and make sure that you've got a feedback process so that you can understand what maybe some of the challenges are, so that you can take a look at the process. But very, very important is that change management, it's a process. It's not a thing that happens overnight. It's a process.
It's like managing any project. I'm glad you brought that up, though, because I think some of the change management is not only illustrating the ROI or the benefit for you, the clerk, because you may be entering a scenario where, well, the clerk always handled that, or your predecessor always handled that. I didn't have to worry about it. Why do I have to worry now? But also illustrating or underscoring the benefits to the council members, the executive leadership. This is how it's going to help you. Here's how we're going to be a better service to our communities or our citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to identify all of the stakeholders, and because the clerk's office impacts almost every other department and members of council and the community, again, it's really important to have those conversations and reach out to those stakeholders so that they know in advance the changes that you're going to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, we'll continue the Q&A portion of the presentation today. Before we get too far along with that, I have a question of our audience. If Madeline, our webinar operator, can run the poll. Literally takes 15 seconds, just a quick how did we do, so we can do better next time. Either Michelle, are there other trends that you're noticing? Obviously, hostility is one. Obviously, digital transformation is another. Are there other trends that you're noticing in the municipal clerk's office that may have an impact in the next 10 years or so?
I'll maybe just jump in first, and then I'll let Michelle add to it. One of the things that we've noticed in the last few years, and quite frankly, one of the reasons we decided to start our business, is that, as Michelle mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, we have noticed that, and you said, you've got lots of municipal clerks that have, 10 years or more experience. And then we've got this newer group that may not have the same experience and exposure to, same skill sets, even the same knowledge and experience. I'll just leave it at that. And then what we've seen is that there's also, in many instances, there isn't bona fide training programs. There are some certifications in Ontario that you mentioned, which we've been very fortunate to be a part of for a number of years, but there isn't necessarily that everywhere else. So I think that, seeking out those additional training opportunities, or finding yourself a mentor, finding another opportunity to develop and build your network with experienced individuals that you can call on, that you can rely on. Michelle and I were both very fortunate throughout our entire career, and in the sense that we were able to have those close connections with more experienced individuals. So you had a problem, like I said, there's a situation where you go, oh my goodness, I haven't seen this before, I haven't done this before, what do I do now? And the Municipal Act doesn't have anything in it, your policies don't have anything, what are you going to do? So being able to pick up that phone or send a quick email to somebody and say, hey, have you ever heard of this before? I've got this new situation, I really don't know how to deal with it. That we have found has been absolutely invaluable throughout our careers. And for those individuals that don't have those networks, strongly encourage them to be able to develop those, as well as seek out those training opportunities to continue to build on what you already have in your toolkit.
Yeah, I love that. I had the opportunity to visit Ontario and go to the annual CAMA conference. And it was amazing to me to see that the same group or the same network of professionals had been attending the same conference for literally decades. They had 20, 30, 40-year tenures in that network. And so, like you said, if it's not within your personal network, you can certainly go out and find that. And even if it's not in your budget, I know that there's grants available to attend those types of events and conferences to learn those skills. So yeah, and I also had a blast at that show. That was a lot of fun just to hang out with city administrators.
Absolutely.
Great. We got a question from a new city clerk. They say, can you offer me the one piece of advice that has been most impactful for you over your career, or anything else that may be a survey takeaway that a new clerk could kind of use as a fodder for learning?
I'm just going to reemphasize the networking, that developing that network and those mentorship opportunities if you have the ability to do so. And I'll leave it at that and see what Michelle has to add.
Yeah, well, just to build on what Michelle said too. So I think, and it takes some time to build those networks, absolutely. But if you can kind of grab like a seasoned mentor first, like I think that's a good first step. But you know, through our careers, we've been able to kind of build those networks so that if there was a finance question that wasn't kind of more clerk related, not really treasurer related, you know, we knew who to call if it was like a, you know, an HR question, that sort of thing. So, you know, we had different people that we could go to, which makes your job a lot easier because then you're not having to figure it out on your own, but you've got that good solid network behind you.
Yeah, that's great. And Michelle Smybert, since you're certainly currently serving on council, this is a question for you. We have certainly dealt with public hostility at our public meetings, but now we're dealing with hostility between council members. I don't know if you've experienced that or not. How would you suggest that the clerk manage staying out of the middle, even if they're trying to pull you in? What is the role of the clerk when there's a conflict between two counselors or you know, executive leadership and a counselor?
And that's a hard one, right? And although I'm personally not seeing that hostility or that conflict, I certainly see it with other municipalities. I see how that happens. And my advice would be is to make sure that you're in constant contact and having discussions with the city manager and the CAO, because I think that it's really going to be some conversations that you'll need to have with the chair or the mayor that is going to have to set, you know, the rules of procedure and also what the expectations are in terms of behavior at a council meeting.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's great. Again, just getting back to the decorum, the process, making sure that everybody's aware of the rules, whatever parliamentary procedure you use, whether it's Robert's rules or a version of that. And you noted this again in the pre-call, Michelle Smybert, that counselors, that's a part-time job, but there's an expectation of professionalism. So maybe it's a new first counselor, but there is that expectation of you're representing yourself and your city in that role.
Right.
I don't know if there's more thought there or not, but.
Well, a little bit. I think this is where it's important for clerks to be aware and understand that you need to educate the elected officials. And because even though we do an orientation, we do a really good job of doing that, we still want to make sure that everyone is working off the same page and working as a team. Because inevitably, if you get that teamwork, good things will happen, right? And hopefully that will avoid some of the conflict. But it's continuous training. It's not just a one and done. So I think as a clerk, you need to kind of pay attention to that. And if you're seeing that there's some frustration around the council table, try to identify what the source is and what kind of training will be best to be delivered in that instance.
What are your thoughts on that, Michelle? Both named Michelle. It's difficult.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
No, I would agree. And I think, as Michelle said, we have seen throughout our careers, we've seen councils that work tremendously well together, and we've seen other councilors that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And there is not any one solution. Again, it's in any organization, in any group of individuals, there's going to be some that really mesh well together and some that just don't. So I think it's a matter of using all of those other interpersonal skills that we have. Communication is key. If there happens to be, you know, two council members that are continually at each other, if you can determine what one of the issues might be, why are they always, you know, batting heads, you know, then you can help to facilitate those discussions. But definitely, as Michelle had said as well, seek the support of your CAO. And, you know, it's not the clerk's job to mediate these types of conflicts. And that's important to know too. And, you know, you don't need to be doing that. We all need to, you know, develop our skills and work as a team together, but ultimately it's the chair or the mayor of the meeting that needs to also manage and facilitate that meeting as well. You know, our job is there to assist as in the parliamentarian role, but you know, ours isn't necessarily to be that you know, official mediator or babysitter to some degree in some instances. So I think
and I agree.
Michelle's hit it.
I think we'd be remiss in just not acknowledging that, you know, it's a political debate or a political discussion. There's always going to be some conflict, especially if there's progress to be made in some senses that's inevitable. I think it was actually your predecessor, David Wilcox, who pointed out a great point on a former webinar that we did in 23. It was the importance and the value of just having that informal check-in before the meeting. Hey, is there anything I should know about? Is there anything on your mind? How are you feeling? How powerful that can be for having a more effective meeting, just checking in as the clerk, even before you need those documents or anything else, just having an informal check-in with your stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would definitely agree with that for sure.
Great. Well, we are almost at time. Audience members, if you have any other questions, now's the time to ask, or otherwise I'm going to wrap it up. And I'm very thankful, Michelle Cassiavecchia-Summers and Michelle Smyber. Thank you so much for joining us, going through some of the results of the survey. Audience members, if you didn't see it, I did drop the PDF to the full survey download. So you don't have to download it again since we already have some of your contact information already. But you can dive in. There's I think it's 14 to 15 pages of data there from the survey that we published. But thank you for helping us analyze that data, Michelle and Michelle. I'm really appreciative of your time with us today.
It's been our pleasure.
Thanks
Absolutely
so much.
enjoyed it.
Great. And with that, we'll wrap up a little bit early, but thank you, audience members, for attending. And we hope to see you on the next one. Again, we will send the on-demand recording, the slides, and I will link to the survey as well to Michelle and Michelle's consultancy website in the follow-up email. We typically get that out without 24 hours. But with that, thank you and have a great afternoon.